we wanted to start with the very latest in terms of the GOP primary.
I'm really excited for that one in particular, the UPS interview. But let's also talk a little bit about Ron DeSantis. Now, one of the things, Krystal, that we talked here about before is that for DeSantis, he has a two-pronged strategy. Number one, the guy has got to win Iowa and he has to win New Hampshire. But also, the death knell of any presidential candidate is if you can win your own home state. Ted Cruz proved his viability in the 2016 race when he was able to win the state of Texas. John Kasich also was able to win the state of Ohio. And when Rubio lost the Florida primary to Donald Trump, he decided to drop out because it showed that even though he represents that state, if he loses to Trump, that means you cannot be the nominee. And unfortunately, right now for Ron DeSantis, things are not looking good. So, right, let's go put this up there on the screen. This is the latest poll for the 2024 Florida Republican primary from the FAU University that shows GOP likely voters. And the numbers are devastating for Ron DeSantis. Trump currently stands at 50%, up 20 points over DeSantis, who has about 30%. After that, everybody drops off dramatically. Ramaswamy, Scott, Christie, Pence, Hutchinson, Haley, polling between 1 and 4%. However, the biggest problem, I think, for DeSantis in his own home state is the head-to-head poll. Even if you remove all of the other GOP contenders, Trump actually increases his support to 54%, with DeSantis only gaining about 7% in the aggregate. Now, obviously, look, it's one poll, but FAU is, it's a pretty high-quality poll in terms of its past record in the state of Florida. And it also does show that, in the past, it showed DeSantis doing well in the gubernatorial primary. It's not really biased against him. It just does pick up. It reminds me of the diner scene that we played here from Fox News when they visited some Florida diner and every single person was voting for Trump. Even the lady wearing a DeSantis shirt was like, yeah, I like Ron, but I'm voting for Trump. So, I mean, listen, it's just one of those that underscores again the level of love that Trump has within the GOP primary that, reality is just beginning to stare a lot of people in the face.
Yes.
6 weeks or so into the Ron DeSantis campaign.
Yes, indeed. And yesterday we covered the analysis of the words that all of the different GOP candidates were leaning into. And the one that really jumped out for Ron DeSantis that was different from the other candidates is Florida. He talks about Florida all the time. He talks about his record in Florida, the fact that, he was able to pass this slate of legislation that is on the conservative wish list, but also the fact that he's such a winner in Florida and that he's so beloved in Florida and that he's been such a good governor of Florida. So I think for him, since he has in particular built his case around this state, the fact that he is losing quite handily to Trump at this point in his own home state is additionally devastating, even more so than it is for your run-of-the-mill candidate who is, losing their own home state. I was thinking of Elizabeth Warren, too, like it really was a sign of the death knell when she wasn't even winning in her home state of Massachusetts. But I think for him it is a little bit extra because he talks about it so much. And the fact that you have not only in the, wide open race with all the various candidates that he's losing by 20 points, but even when you say, all right, if everybody gets out and you have some consolidation behind Ron DeSantis, Trump is still beating him by roughly the same margin. So again, it's one poll, it's one little indicator, but if you aren't winning in your home state when supposedly your theory of the case is I'm such a great governor and people love me so much, that's why you should make me president of the United States, it's a tough look.
One of the people who's been backing Ron DeSantis, Eric Erickson, he's a conservative radio host. He's actually been openly saying he's in a number of group chats, email lists, all of whom are dealing with the ongoing threads of frustration from the Ron DeSantis campaign. Perception is settling in that something needs to happen, but everyone has a different opinion on what to do. And, there's been a lot of interest right now in Casey DeSantis, Ron DeSantis's wife. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen about how she herself is now beginning to hit the campaign trail, actually without Ron DeSantis. So the Florida First Lady is launching, quote, Mamas for DeSantis at a first solo event in Iowa. Can she help her husband close the gap in the polls with Trump? This was from the Daily Mail, who took notice of this and reported the piece out. The reason why it is important is that from all of what we know, both publicly, privately also, I've heard the exact same thing, is that DeSantis really doesn't trust anybody except for his wife. She's truly his sole true counselor in terms of a close confidant not. She was one of the people who encouraged him and pushed him to run for president, saying that this is your time, encouraging after he won the gubernatorial election, has been warning him off a lot of, campaign advisor snakes and others. He keeps very, very close counsel with her, and he trusts her completely. There's very few people that he does. Him dispatching her on the campaign trail is being read by the Trump folks as a sign of desperation. It's like, oh, you need your wife to bail you out. I don't think necessarily if that's fair or not, but I do think that her pursuing solo campaign events, that is something that very few campaign spouses do in primary elections. Not necessarily in the general election, but in the primary election where we are right now. I can't think of a single event that like Heidi Cruz did by herself in Iowa, or Melania. I think they had to drag her out even for the joint appearances.
Michelle probably did some back in the day for Obama.
I think Michelle did some. I'm not sure if she did in the primary or not. I haven't, gone back and looked at that. But
Yeah.
at least in modern memory, it is certainly kind of a departure, I guess, from the norm. And it's like I say, you can read it really whichever way you want, as a sign of desperation or as just pulling out all the stops. The problem, though, is you're pulling out all the stops, this far out away from actual primary day. I also do think that is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, they're clearly scrambling,
Yeah.
between this and between that weird LGBTQ ad that they embraced. And, it just feels like they are churning through a lot of ideas, throwing everything against the wall and seeing what sticks. I got to tell you, I watched a little bit of her Iowa event, her Mamas for DeSantis event, and she's very talented. Maybe she should be the one running
Well, she's
for
actually
president.
a former local TV. No, she's good.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Because the thing is, Ron, I think it's true that he is kind of, he's kind of an introvert. He's kind of awkward, person-to-person interactions, a little uncomfortable in his speeches. They feel very kind of canned, in his interviews. He does fine as long as he's got his talking points. She felt a lot more natural and comfortable up on stage. So I can see why they're leaning into putting her up front, because she's certainly very capable in that regard and, able to carry her husband's message. But, people aren't voting for a first lady.
Yeah,
They're voting for you.
Exactly, and that's that's generally always the problem with trying to get the wife to save your campaign. I've also taken notice, kind of to the scrambling of what you're talking about, in these increasingly desperate attacks against Trump. Like the best attacks against Trump, where he said he was going to do X, and then he literally didn't do it. But now they're trying to flip things around, and DeSantis himself actually made this point in a Fox News interview, where he effectively tried to blame Trump for not lashing out at Twitter over censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story. And the reason why I think it's so convoluted is he didn't have anything to do with that. So he's trying to almost insert himself into a situation which had no impact, like actually on him or even really on any GOP primary, and say he would have handled it in a tougher way. I found it a very, very convoluted and almost bizarre way of saying that he would have handled something differently. Here's what he had to say.
What can you do about it to straighten things out, given the fact that the Americans are sick and tired of the corruption they see in plain sight?
We will end the weaponization of government. And that's, of course, a new FBI director on day one. That's a difference between me and Donald Trump. He says the jury's still out on FBI Director Wray. I think you need a new start on day one. We're going to clean house at the Department of Justice. And, I look back at like the Hunter Biden censorship, which was a huge, huge deal to happen in the 2020 election. And yet, those were Donald Trump's own agencies that were colluding with big tech. I would never allow that to happen. I would fire those people immediately. And in fact, in Florida, we've signed legislation that prohibits all state and local government officials in our state from colluding with tech companies to try to censor the political speech of Americans.
So again, I think that on the merits, he has an important point. But the problem I think that he comes back to is he's like, Trump wasn't strong enough in going after Trump's opponents. And it's like, well, hold on a second here. For Trump, you're still making him the central character. And also, whenever it comes to this whole, like, I'm signed the bill, I actually did the work. I, again, am coming back to almost like an Elizabeth Warren type campaign of like, this whole like doing the work meme that used to abound really at that time. This is something that appeals, I think, to a lot of policy wonks and, people like me who actually pay a deep amount of attention. But that is just not how the average voter conceives of anything that happened in that time. And if anything, they're like, yeah, they censored that story because they're so afraid of Trump. Why is nobody so afraid of you? That's why I love Trump. Seriously, that's how a lot of that is going to be interpreted.
Well, we gave him a hard time early on when he wouldn't even say Trump's name, and he was very skittish about attacking Trump. Now he is going after him a little bit more, staking out some, clear positions, mostly to his right. But I think we are seeing in the polling, and especially in DeSantis's favorability ratings, why that was such a perilous prospect and why he's in this impossible situation. Because obviously you have to go after Trump. You have to give people a reason to, move off of the guy that they want to vote for and that they really like and that they've supported for years and years at this point. But at the same time, when you hit him, you get a lot of blowback. And so, he used to have a much higher favorability rating. That has started to ebb even among Republican primary voters. And I do think part of that is because it is hard to go directly up against Donald Trump in a Republican primary. I've said this for a while now. There's all kinds of critiques you could level at the DeSantis campaign, missteps, things they maybe could have done different. But given who their candidate is, given the landscape, I just think it's an impossible puzzle to be able to put together. I don't know what I would suggest to him to do, because you attack Trump, it's bad for you. You don't attack him, then he's just going to stay where he is. The only thing he really has going for him right now is like to pray that something weird happens and he ends up as like the last man standing, because I think that's what it would take.
Right. I mean, listen, they called it a Gordian knot at the beginning, and I think it really does vindicate a lot of that.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.